ever attended Him, I cannot succeed. With that assistance, I cannot fail. Trusting in Him who can go with me and remain with you and be everywhere for good, let us confidently hope that all will yet be well.
This has been an American Minute with Bill Federer. For a free transcript, call American Minute at 1-888-USA-WORD.
VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at VCYAmerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And it's a news roundup day here today on Crosstalk. Thanks for tuning in to the VCY America Network for our broadcast here today. Our thanks to Sandy, who's been busy all week long getting stories for us, and also thanks to Dalton, who's filled in these last few News Roundup Day programs. So appreciate his getting these stories out to you and commenting on them as well. Well, today we've got much on the plate, and we're going to encourage you to put on the seatbelt, buckle up, and away we go. One of the stunning stories here this week is the Biden administration raising this terror threat alert over things like election fraud or COVID misinformation. This is the National Terrorism Advisory System Bulletin. It was issued Monday. The DHS warned of a heightened threat of terror. The member stated as an example of the widespread online proliferation of false or misleading narratives regarding unsubstantiated widespread election fraud and COVID-19. Grievances associated with these themes inspired violent extremist activities during 2021, DHS had said. I've got a copy of the bulletin in front of me here, and it's a few pages long. I'm only going to read just a couple paragraphs, though. But their opening paragraph says this: the United States remains in a heightened threat environment fueled by several factors, including an online environment filled with false or misleading narratives and conspiracy theories and other forms of dis, and malinformation. They're calling it MDM, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, MDM, introduced and or amplified by foreign and domestic threat actors. The threat actors seek to exacerbate societal friction, to sow discord and undermine public trust in government institutions, to encourage unrest, which could potentially inspire acts of violence. Folks, aren't they just carrying this too far? I mean, if you give what they determine to be misinformation, if you speak against anything Dr. Anthony Fauci is saying, you're a terrorist threat. The primary terrorism-related threat to the U.S. continues to stem from lone offenders or small cells of individuals who are motivated by a range of foreign and or domestic grievances over cultivated through the consumption of certain online content. They talk about the proliferation of false or misleading narratives that sow discord or undermine public trust in U.S. government. Oh, my. I mean, they talk about widespread online proliferation, that is, of false or misleading narratives, unsubstantiated widespread election fraud, COVID-19 misinformation, continued calls for violence directed at U.S. critical infrastructure. They go through and give many, many examples of that, but then also calls by foreign terrorist organizations for attacks in the U.S. based on recent events. DHS and the Federal Bureau of Investigation continue to share timely and actionable information and intelligence with the broadest audience possible. Their Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships, providing communities with resources and tools to help prevent individuals from radicalizing to violence. Isn't that something? To go and share on your social media accounts or share viewpoints that don't meet the government narrative, that this might radicalize people to violence? Lord willing, this coming Monday, Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel will be joining us on this and some other national issues that are going on. But this terrorism threat to the U.S. homeland over those who the government deems are giving misinformation on COVID-19 or on the elections here of 2020, just amazing how far that they are carrying this matter. In other news, we have Senator Ted Cruz this week. He made a stunning speech as it relates to, denouncing the soft on crime policies that are coming from across the aisle, and explained how Americans across the country are suffering the consequences of these policies. Now, folks, we've got a lot of crime going on in cities across this nation. I mean, we're in Milwaukee. We've seen it, the carjackings that are going on, the violence that is taking place, homicide records that are being set in cities all across the state. Across this nation. Ted Cruz addressed that. Here's what he had to say.
Crime is surging across this country. Murder rates are rising, assault rates are rising, carjacking rates are rising. Last year, 12 major American cities broke records, homicide rates. Portland, Indianapolis, Toledo, Rochester, St. Paul, Tucson, Albuquerque, Louisville, Columbus, Baton Rouge, Austin, and Philadelphia. What do those 12 cities have in common? Every single one of them is run by Democrats, all of them. The crime that we are seeing surging across this country is a direct result of Democrats' soft-on-crime policies. Joe Biden nominated not one but two of the leading advocates in the country for abolishing the police to senior roles at the U.S. Department of Justice. Every single Senate Democrat voted to confirm two of the leading advocates of abolishing the police to senior positions at the U.S. Department of Justice. When Democrats engage in anti-police rhetoric, when they demonize police officers, it has consequences. President Biden nominated Rachel Rollins to be the U.S. Attorney of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Rachel Rollins is one of the many Soros DAs who, as district attorney in Suffolk County, put out a list of 15 crimes her prosecutors were not allowed to prosecute. When you have soft-on-crime Democratic DAs that are releasing violent criminals on shockingly low bail, those violent criminals go out and they commit violent crime yet again. And in the face of skyrocketing crime that has women and men across this country deeply, deeply concerned for the safety of their family, the White House press secretary laughs about it. Laughs about what crime? What are you talking about? This administration is so out of touch, they don't understand that when people are getting carjacked, when their homes are threatened, their lives are threatened, that violent crime is real, and when you attack and demonize police officers over and over again, it has a consequence. It is wrong. And I got to say, at any point, Senate Democrats, one Senate Democrat could have stood up and said enough is enough. If one Senate Democrat on the Judiciary Committee had said no, these advocates for abolishing the police would not be senior members of the Department of Justice. If one Senate Democrat on the Judiciary Committee had said no, Rachel Rollins, this incredibly soft-on-crime Soros DA, who effectively abolished the police by ordering her prosecutors not to prosecute drug crimes, not to prosecute resisting arrest, not to prosecute trespassing. We're seeing in stores across the country looters breaking in, mocking the law because Democrats won't prosecute them. It's not right. It's not fair. And we need to keep people safe.
Senator Ted Cruz this Wednesday making that speech. The convoys, Ontario, Canada. The premier there, Doug Ford, today declared a state of emergency in response to the ongoing Ambassador Bridge blockade and protest in Ottawa against the COVID restrictions. The premier said that truckers could lose their licenses if they don't comply with orders being enacted under a newly announced state of emergency aimed at breaking up the demonstration. Speaking at a news conference, Ford said that he would convene cabinet to use legal authorities to urgently enact orders that will make it crystal clear that it is illegal and punishable to block and impede the movement of goods, people, and services along critical infrastructure. This will include protecting international border crossings, 400 series highways, airports, ports, bridges, and railways, and that fines for noncompliance will be severe with a maximum penalty penalty of $100,000 and up to a year imprisonment. Isn't that what? Okay, put all the truckers in jail for a year, and then you'll see what happens there as well. Okay, CBN News reporting that the Biden administration is urging the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, to use its federal powers to end the truck blockade by Canadians protesting the country's COVID-19 restrictions. The bumper-to-bumper demonstrations forced auto plants on both sides of the border to shut down or scale back production. For the fourth straight day, scores of truckers taking part in what they dubbed the Freedom Convoy blocked the Ambassador Bridge connecting Windsor, Ontario to Detroit, disrupting the flow of auto parts and other products. Conservative Ontario Premier Doug Ford moved to cut off funding for the protests by successfully asking a court to freeze millions of dollars in donations to the convoy through crowdfunding site Give, Send, Go. Canadian officials previously got GoFundMe to cut off funding after protest organizers used the site to raise about 10 million Canadian dollars. In the U.S., authorities brace for the possibility of similar truck-borne protests inspired by the Canadians, and authorities in Paris and Belgium banned road blockades to head off disruptions there as well. Trudeau continued to stand firm against lifting vaccine mandates, including a requirement that all truck drivers entering the country be fully vaccinated. But because an estimated 90% of the nation's truckers are already inoculated, some conservatives have called on the Prime Minister to drop the mandate. The Daily Wire telling us that 4 Canadian provinces have moved now to lift the COVID-19 restrictions. Quebec, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Prince Edward Island provinces have all announced plans to eliminate or roll back some of the measures. The issue also from the Federalists is, why aren't corporate media talking about the car that crashed into the Freedom Convoy? No, you hear about the Freedom Convoy, but the legacy media is trying to not report on a incident that happened. A car 1 week ago, February 4th, plowed through a group of demonstrators against COVID restrictions in Winnipeg, Canada. The driver fled the scene, leaving 4 adult males injured. Videos taken by surveillance cameras and bystanders show the moment of impact. It's a white Jeep Patriot, speeds up past the trail of cars and aims directly at a group of protesters. One of the victims can clearly be seen being driven over as the Jeep's operator indiscriminately steers into others. Where is the world's media? Where is our national media covering that issue? From CBN News, now truckers in the U.S. are also organizing a protest where participants will drive all the way across the country from California to the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. Brian Brace helped assemble Convoy to D.C. 22, which gained over 100,000 members as a place for truckers to discuss and plan the upcoming journey. Well, during the interview with Fox News host Tucker Carlson, Brace revealed that Facebook removed the group's page. They made the excuse that it was based on a violation of policies around their QAnon standards. The thing was not, he said that the thing was that none of us were associated with any of that. We've been advocating for being very centered. It's not a right issue. It's not a left issue. This is an American issue. This is a human issue where standing up to the mandates is a constitutional violation. It doesn't matter what country you're from, where you align yourself with different segments of society. It's about a movement across this globe to stand up to our governments as individuals and our rights, especially when it comes to health care. Meanwhile, the European Freedom Convoy 2022 is preparing to hit the highway February 14th, a destination point of Brussels. And the reports indicate that truck drivers in the Netherlands, New Zealand, Australia, and the the UK, also hitting the road to send a clear message, and that is to stop the mandates. Truck drivers in Alaska even made their own Alaska Freedom Convoy on Sunday in support of the Canadian truckers. We're going to take a quick break here on Crosstalk. We'll be back with more news roundup stories here in just a moment. This is Crosstalk coming your way from the VCY America Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, what caused the Ice Age?
Chris, as near as we can tell, the Ice Age came after the flood, kind of an after effect of the flood caused by the flood itself. The primary cause of the Ice Age was that snow accumulated in vast quantities and did not melt, as it piled up and turned into ice and began to flow as glaciers. The real need for enhanced snowfall is more evaporation from the ocean waters, and this would have happened if the ocean waters were warmer. We see from Scripture that the fountains of the great deep brought up superheated waters from deep inside the earth. I suspect that the floodwaters were significantly warmer than today. This evaporation provided the raw material for the Ice Age. Even though the Ice Age isn't mentioned by name in Scripture, it is intimated. Even the Ice Age goes back to Genesis.
To learn more about creation, get our free DVD called That's a Fact. Call us at 800-628-7640 and mention the promo code FACT.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. It's a news roundup day here today. And yeah, those convoys are building up across, well, all over the world. The Washington Times even telling us New Zealand. Police yesterday began arresting some of the protesters who've been camped out on Parliament's grounds there as a convoy protest against the mandates entered its third day. Called in 100 extra officers from other parts of the country. That has been building in New Zealand. And then also from LifeSiteNews.com, the story of the French police threatening truckers and protesters who are gathered in convoys making their way to Paris, threatening with heavy fines, threatening with jail sentences. Truly interesting to watch what is taking place as people around the world are raising up against mandates. From CBN, the CIA has a secret undisclosed data repository that includes information collected about Americans, two Democrats on the Senate Intelligence Committee said. While neither the agency nor lawmakers would disclose specifics about the data, the senators alleged that CIA had long hidden details about the program from the public in Congress. Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, Martin Heinrich of New Mexico sent a letter to top intelligence officials calling for more details about the program to be declassified. Large parts of the letter, which were sent in April 2021 and declassified Thursday, documents released by the CIA were blacked out. The two congressmen said the program operated outside the statutory framework that Congress and the public believe govern this collection. Long been concerns about what information the Intelligence Committee collects domestically, driven in part by previous violations of America's civil liberties. Intelligence agencies are required to take steps to protect U.S. information, like redacting the names of any American from reports unless they're deemed relevant to an investigation. The process of redaction is called unmasking. Well, additional documents released by the CIA yesterday also revealed that limited details about a program to collect financial data against the Islamic State. It also incidentally snared some records held by Americans. Intelligence agencies are subject to guidelines in the handling of and destruction of Americans' data. From Sons of Liberty, a group of lawmakers led by Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut and Lindsey Graham have reintroduced the Earn It Act. It's an incredibly unpopular bill from 2020 that was dropped in the face of overwhelming opposition. The new Earn It Act would pave the way for a massive new surveillance system run by private companies that would roll back some of the most important privacy and security features and technology used by people around the globe. It's a framework for private actors to scan every message sent online and report violations to law enforcement. And it might not stop at that. The Earn It Act could ensure that anything hosted online, backups, websites, cloud photos, and more, be scanned. The bill empowers every U.S. state or territory to create sweeping new Internet regulations by stripping away the critical legal protections for websites and apps that currently prevent such a free-for-all, specifically Section 230. The states would be allowed to pass whatever type of law they want to hold private companies liable as long as they somehow relate to their new rules to online child abuse. Well, it is S3538. It's called the Earn It Act of 2022, S3538. Introduced in the Senate on January 31. Okay, well, I guess the U.S. is not the only place things are going on. From LifeSiteNews.com, it sounds bland enough, but according to the Australian federal government, a proposed bill to have a digital identity system, which is to apply to everyone, is necessary because, quote, Effective governance of the system is essential to the efficient operation of and instilling public trust and confidence in the system. Wow. Problem is, the Australian government has lost their credibility over these last couple of years. The digital ID concept is not new. In the 1980s, Bob Hawke's Labor government pushed hard to introduce identity card legislation, but it was defeated. It is more important to resist this time around. Digital systems can allow total control over everything a citizen does. In the first instance, it would include health care and then extend that use to COVID-19 digital certificates. And then it will not stop there. A digital identity will allow all telecommunications to be monitored and control access to government services, social media, financial services, and travel. Total power, in other words. Okay, LifeNews.com. The television ratings for the Beijing Olympics hit a record low as people around the world are boycotting what are being called the Genocide Games. The American Military News reporting Iran has unveiled a new missile Wednesday that it claims can travel up to 900 miles, placing more U.S. bases in the Middle East within its potential striking distance. So what does the Biden administration do? The Biden administration will not commit to submitting a new Iran nuclear deal to Congress for approval, as required by the law. When the U.S. is poised to ink a new deal with Tehran that will unwind virtually all economic sanctions on Iran and provide the hardline regime with billions in cash windfalls, the State Department won't say whether the deal will be sent to Congress for sign-off. Under the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act of 2015, which was passed after the Obama administration signed a deal without congressional approval, President Joe Biden must submit any deal to the Senate for it to be considered American policy. But since when has law and the Constitution mattered here before? The Washington Free Beacon, the Biden administration said Wednesday its plan to fund crack smoking kits will not include glass pipes. The Department of Health and Human Services is focusing on using our resources smartly to reduce harm and save lives, said Secretary Becerra. According to no federal funding will be used directly or through subsequent reimbursement of grantees to put pipes in safe smoking kits. Well, the announcement comes in response to a Monday Washington Free Beacon report that HHS is set to spend $30 million on a harm reduction grant program that would reimburse local governments that provide smoking kits for users of crack cocaine. An HHS spokesman initially confirmed to the Free Beacon that the kits provided through the grant program were designed to smoke crack cocaine, crystal methamphetamine, as well as any illicit substance. After publication of report on the funding, HHS now has backtracked in a Tuesday statement that labeled the story blatant misinformation. Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee said Wednesday she would put on hold funding for the program until it was modified to ban spending on drug paraphernalia. In addition to smoking kits, the grant also provides funds for syringes, fentanyl strips, vaccinations, disease screenings, and condoms. Funding for this, guess what, comes from the American Rescue Plan. More than a dozen Republican senators introduced a measure yesterday that would ban a pandemic relief program from funding the distribution of crack pipes. It's called the Cutting Off Rampant Access to Crack Kits, or the CRACK Act. Marco Rubio put that together. Allocates $30 million for a program that would amend that rescue plan that allocates the $30 million for the smoking kits, saying it is pure insanity to think that the federal government would fund crack pipe distribution, Rubio said. The legislation will make certain the program can never pay for crack pipes. Daily Caller telling us the White House has approved a plan from the Pentagon to utilize almost 2,000 U.S. troops in Poland to aid in the evacuation of Americans from Ukraine should Russia decide to invade, the Wall Street Journal reported. Epoch Times telling us the doctor who helped discover the Omicron COVID-19 variant claims she was pressured by several government officials not to reveal that it was a milder strain. Speaking to Germany's Welt newspaper, Dr. Angelique Coetzee, who is currently the head of the South African Medical Association, said that during discussions with European officials, she was told not to say that Omicron patients presented milder symptoms that is, than prior COVID-19 variants. I was told not to publicly state that it was a mild illness. I've been asked to refrain from making such statements and to say that it is a serious illness. She said, I declined. From the vaccine reaction, the first Spanish study on how the Omicron variant of COVID-19 infects, incubates, and transmits, recently concluded by the Public Health Observatory of Chantabria. The findings, which have not yet been peer-reviewed, show that the highly infectious variant accounted for nearly half of the infections recorded during the whole pandemic. One reason Omicron is proved to be so transmissible is that the window for transmission is earlier than previous variants. And let's see here. They go on to say perhaps the most consequential finding in the research is that vaccines did not appear to reduce the spread of the virus. Vaccinated cases seem to have the same transmission capacity as unvaccinated people, researchers concluded. The Daily Wire tells us Congressman Hakeem Jeffries credited President Joe Biden's leadership for the rapidly growing number of states and municipalities that have either set dates to roll back their mask mandates or have already removed them. Jeffrey said Tuesday it was the Biden administration's efforts to put in place a public health infrastructure that has been instrumental in crushing the virus to the degree that many were beginning to see the list at the end of the tunnel. A reporter asked him to weigh in on the states that had announced an end date to indoor mask mandates. He mentioned California, where the mandates will only remain in place for the unvaccinated, along with Connecticut, New Jersey, and Delaware. He asked Jeffries to respond to criticisms that Democrats were in a hurry to put the pandemic behind them as the 2022 midterm elections approached. Here's where we are in America, he said. Job creation is up, wages are up, unemployment is down, and the Omicron variant is in retreat, and that's not by accident. We are the saviors here, folks. Now, just watch how much this is going to go away before the 2022 elections. Well, Jen Psaki, press secretary for the White House, defended Joe Biden's process for determining the federal government's masking guidance when she was pressed by a reporter this Wednesday. Here's what she had to say.
I have a question about how the president is going to make the decision about changing the recommendation on masks. Is he totally...
He will make the decision based on what the CDC advises. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So the CDC calls the shots here. It's not like he measures trade-offs, the economy, mental health, people's behavior. It's just when the CDC says it's okay to do, that's what will determine his decision. But he doesn't take into account all these other factors.
Well, what he has made the commitment to the American people on back when he ran for president, and we've tried to abide by, is that he would listen to the data, listen to the science. And certainly our health and medical team, obviously the CDC is part of that, Dr. Fauci, other experts. You've heard, though I would note, Dr. Murthy and others talk about mental health impacts. So I would point you to them to talk about all the factors, but we're certainly going to listen to our doctors and medical experts.
What I'm trying to determine is, what does listen mean? Does it mean that the CDC calls the shots here, or, as these governors have done, does the president take into account the trade-offs? I mean, this is about public health. It's not like just some kind of abstract thing in a vacuum. Kids' mental health is affected by wearing masks. Human behavior is part of this. The economy is part of this. Does he take those into account, or does he assume the CDC will do that for him?
Well, I think, Mara, it's also important to note that masks are effective at reducing transmission in schools and other places, and we know that from what the data has told us, right? There are a range of health and medical experts who advise the president and make determinations about how the CDC guidance will be changed, but that is what we rely on, yes.
There are a lot of doctors who are now signing statements saying it's time to lift mask mandates, especially for kids.
I understand that, but we rely on the health and medical experts who work in the federal government, as we should, even as we account for and consult with outside experts.
Okay, yeah, don't consider these other factors. We rely upon these scientists within the federal government. That was Jen Psaki Wednesday of this week asking about the mask guidance and especially the psychological impact that this is having on children all across this nation. From downhall.com, during an interview with MSNBC Tuesday morning, American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingarten insisted kids must continue to be masked in schools pretty much indefinitely. What are the measures so that everybody knows, so it doesn't feel like it's based upon politics? It feels like it's based upon making sure that there's no transmission in schools. That's, folks, it's an impossible standard of no transmission whatsoever. So we got to keep the mask until such time. We'll be back in just a minute. This is Crosstalk on VCY America.
If you're like most individuals, you look forward to your vacation. Many will take great effort to consider a destination the family will enjoy, what to do, where to stay, and what highways to take to get there. Sadly, most people spend more time planning their one-week vacation than they do preparing for eternity. The Bible says our life is but a vapor. None of us has the promise of tomorrow, and our eternal destiny is sealed at death. Wouldn't it be wise to investigate these things? That's the purpose of the book, Preparing for Eternity. In this book, author Mike Gendron contrasts the truth of God's Word with the teachings and traditions he was taught for over 30 years in the Roman Catholic Church. He found that eternal life is not merited by good works, but is given freely by God's grace to those who put their faith and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ as their all-sufficient Savior. The book, Preparing for Eternity, is available for a donation of $17 or more to VCY America by calling 1-800-729-9829. 1-800-729-9829.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America, a news roundup day here today on the broadcast. And wow, I look at the clock, I see the number of stories. We'll get in what we can, but we do want to have opportunity for you to weigh in on some of these issues as well. Yes, the New Zealand Prime Minister was saying that, was responding to reporters' questions when asked about the COVID vaccines, reported side effects, but her comments only created more questions. Here was what Jacinda Ardern said. She said, the side effects that people experience with vaccines, something which we all have come to expect, are a sign that the vaccine's doing what it should. Think about that. All these adverse reactions, it's a sign that the vaccine is doing what it should. WND.com says ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, Washington Post, and on it goes, other major media outlets ignored a Johns Hopkins University study finding that COVID lockdowns have been ineffective. The meta-analysis, which began by examining more than 18,000 studies, found that during the first COVID wave in the spring of 2020, lockdowns in the U.S. and Europe reduced COVID mortality by 0.2%. While the meta-analysis concludes that lockdowns have little to no public health effects, they have imposed enormous economic and societal costs where they have been adopted, the researchers reported. In consequence, lockdown policies are ill-founded and should be rejected as a pandemic policy instrument. Why do you suppose the news media across this nation would not cover that story? A major story from Johns Hopkins University, a study. I mean, they examined more than 18,000 studies. And yet you get Dr. Fauci that will say one sentence and the whole world hears about it for the next week. Many of you are aware Pastor Arthur Pawlowski arrested again at his home, Calgary, Tuesday morning, scheduled to appear at a peaceful Freedom Trucker protest. An undercover SWAT team arrested the Christian preacher after staking out his home in a van, according to Pawlowski's son, Nathaniel. He was planning to perform a church service for the trucker blockade in Milk River, Alberta. A Calgary police officer can be heard saying that Pawlowski was under arrest for mischief. Let's see here. Hundreds of New York City employees, including teachers, police, firefighters, and various trade unions, braved the elements to protest the imminent firing of approximately 4,000 city workers who've chosen not to receive the shot. Daily Signal telling us major technology companies and social media platforms have removed, suppressed, or flagged the accounts of more than 800 prominent individuals and organizations, including medical doctors, for COVID-19 misinformation, according to a new study from the Media Research Center. The study focused on acts of censorship on major social media platforms, online services like Facebook and YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Google Ads, and TikTok. Instances of censorship included Facebook's decision to flag the British Medical Journal with a fact-checked and missing context label, reducing the visibility of a post for a study delving into data integrity issues with the Pfizer vaccine clinical trial. Facebook also deleted the page of the Great Barrington Declaration, an open letter by dozens of medical professionals that advocated for less restrictive measures to address the dangers of COVID-19. The Epoch Times telling us of Dr. Merrill Nass, hailed a hero by veterans for helping them expose the connection between the military's mandatory anthrax vaccine and the serious illnesses that they were experiencing. But now the 70-year-old Maine internist has given congressional testimonies in 4 states on vaccine efficacies, deciphered scientific studies for courts, and served as an international national consultant on biological warfare and pandemics for more than 3 decades. Last month, the Maine Board of Licensure in Medicine suspended her license and set a string of conditions for her to meet in order for her to get her license back, including undergoing psychiatric evaluation. Evidently, according to a state's complaint, the Maine's board harsh scrutiny of Nass seems specifically from 3 legal prescriptions that she wrote for ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine for the prevention and treatment of COVID-19. Patients didn't complain about the prescription, all recovered from the virus. But because she gave these prescriptions, she's got to now have a psychiatric evaluation? LifeSiteNews.com, the European Commission announced it intends to extend use of the digital COVID certificate until June 30th of 2023 at earliest. That was supposed to end the end of June of this year. Okay, yes, the Biden administration wants 50% of all new cars sold by 2030 to be electric or plug-in hybrids. But the average range of today's electric cars is about 180 miles. That means for any trip on an interstate, there has to be charging stations every few miles to ensure that people are not stuck in the middle of nowhere, high and dry. Recognizing the problem, a big chunk of funding in the infrastructure bill is for building a network of power stations from Texas to Canada and from sea to shining sea. Well, there goes tax dollars at work again. Okay, by the way, for those of you in the state of Wisconsin, please know that there was a bill introduced February 1st. They had a public hearing of February 8th. Passed out of committee on the 11th. It's known as the Wisconsin Heartbeat legislation to the detection of an abortion after detection of a fetal heartbeat and providing a penalty. It's available now for scheduling in the Wisconsin State Senate. It is Senate Bill number 923 in the state of Wisconsin. That's number 923. Okay, yeah, and inflation skyrocketing to 7.5%, the highest rate since 1982. India planning to launch government-backed digital currency with a digital version of its currency, the rupee. And making the announcement last week, the country's finance minister said the move would strengthen the country's online economy, reports CBN News. Washington Free Beacon tells us ICE deported just 55,590 illegal immigrants in 2021. That's the fewest number in 5 years, a 70% decrease from the year 2020. Let's see. We're going to move on to another story here. Anti-Semitic crimes spiked nearly 300% in New York City last month since last year. Recall election going on in San Francisco. The school board happens next week. Has drawn all sorts of national attention over the past years, almost entirely for the wrong reasons. Other school districts across the country were struggling to find ways to get kids get back into the classroom. The San Francisco school board spent its time renaming schools with offensive names, such as they had to rename schools that had the names like George Washington in it. Well, an interesting recall coming up this coming Tuesday for San Francisco. When does life begin? You know, it seems to be a basic question. Don't we hear from the White House all the time, follow the science? We need to follow the science, follow the science, follow the science, wear a mask, follow the science, do this, follow the science. And when you do that, when you get asked the question when life begins, all of a sudden science doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter. We do know that science tells us that life begins at conception. But when Jen Psaki was asked this week, listen to how she diverted from the question.
Good afternoon, Jen. A couple of questions for you. Back to the Supreme Court.
Sure.
How will the debate over abortion shape the president's selection process?
The president is going to select an eminently qualified black woman to serve on the court, and he's going to do that through consulting with a range of members of Congress, through outside experts, and obviously through engagement with them directly. But I don't think I'm going to give you more specifics from here.
Will that person have to be pro-abortion?
I think somebody asked a similar question. I'm not going to outline litmus tests from here today.
Following up on that, the president has said in the past he does not believe that life begins at conception. When does he believe it begins?
You know the president's position. He believes in a woman's right to choose, and he's spoken to this in the past. So, and I know you ask this every time you come in here, which is you're absolute right. But I don't think I have anything new to reveal for you.
The question is, when does he believe life begins? And it's central to the debate over the question of a baby's viability. And pro-life Americans, don't you agree, should know where the president stands in his thinking, and this is a fundamental question.
The president believes in a woman's right to choose. Go ahead. I think we're going to move on unless you have another question.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Folks, just amazing. Can't answer that question. How about follow the science? Let's open some phone lines here today on Crosstalk. Our number is 800-733-9829. 800-733-9829. If you want to comment on these or other current event news-related stories here today, 800-733-9829. The Virginia Senate has passed a bill that would mandate parental notification for sexually explicit school content and allow parents to demand non-explicit material. The majority Democrat chamber approved the legislation, SB 656, in a 20-18 vote Wednesday. Two Democrat senators, Linwood Lewis and Monty Mason, joined Republicans to pass the bill. SB 656 requires public schools to notify parents of any instructional material that includes sexually explicit content and allow parents to review it. The legislation also requires schools to provide alternative, non-explicit material to any student upon a parent's request. And, you know, with the students giving Valentine's out on Monday, a private school in Providence, Rhode Island, has recommended that students avoid sending Valentine's cards that portray only white people. Parents and students of Moses Brown Lower School received the following guidelines. I'll just mention a couple of them. Please coach your child of purchasing commercially produced cards to select something that does not feel gender normative. That's, separate boy cards or girl cards. You don't give out something that's gender normative, and consider talking to your children about avoiding cards that portray only white human characters. Okay, we're going to go to some phone lines here today on Crosstalk. We're going to begin with Debbie calling in from Phoenix, Arizona. Debbie, you're on the air.
Hi, Jim. Thanks. I listen to you daily. I'm a registered nurse, been here working for 40 years in Arizona. I'm concerned about the healthcare workers, so the government saying if they, facility, which is almost everyone gets Medicaid or Medicare money, the workers have to be fully vaccinated. Well, I don't think it's going to stop there. I mean, I think they could say that for, if you're a Medicare or Medicaid recipient, or if you get Social Security. I mean, has anyone been thinking ahead to how these mandates could play out for not just healthcare workers in these facilities, but for patients?
Indeed.
And I'm getting close to the Medicare age.
Indeed. And that's why there are so many that are trying to nip this in the bud now with these mandates, because of where this is going. An unchecked government is going to go even further down this road in that regard. And that's why it's so important. I mean, even what's going on with the truckers, they're standing up now in countries all over the world. Said this has to be your stopping point, because if you allow this to continue on, there is just no end as to where these mandates are going to go.
Right. And let me make one other comment for the Americans that don't know this. Medicare and Medicaid are not the same thing. Medicare I've been paying into for my entire life. Medicaid is an entitlement program. It used to be called indigent health care. And another comment real quick on Jen Psaki. I don't even know why they bother showing up to her press conferences. I mean, really? She's not going to say anything they want to hear. Why don't they just boycott her? I don't see why she's even necessary at this point. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Colleen in Menominee Falls, you're on the air.
Hi. I'm glad you're well. God bless you. I had been watching on TV. There were protests like the truckers' protests. Only in that case, it was about a year or two ago, I'm not sure, and they were all blocking roads and everything so that people couldn't get around, because something about the French speaking and the native speaking, and that they wanted to secede or something, and people on the TV were lamenting that the government wouldn't do anything about them. What a turnaround.
Thank you for that comment, Colleen. Up against a break. Back in a minute. Our number to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. Yeah, double standards? Back in a minute.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewreport.com. In the book of Genesis, we're told by God himself, I'll bless those who bless you, and I'll curse those who curse you. God is speaking specifically about the Jewish people. We don't have to agree with everything the Israeli government does to understand the importance of God's plan for the Jewish people, particularly in the tribulation, and that many of them will come to Yeshua or Messiah. With that being said, and that as our background understanding, what happens to America as we turn our back on Israel and empower the enemies of Israel? Over the weekend, it came out that Iran, well, they're about to have unfrozen $29 billion thanks to the Biden regime. $29 billion unfrozen for them to continue their nuclear program to what? Well, eventually try to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. Will there be consequences for America? I think there will be. I'm Brandon House.
I don't know where that classroom is from, but did you hear the audio clip of the kids being told that they're not going to have to wear a mask anymore in the classroom? Yeah, they're celebrating their freedom. Listen in. Todd Starn said this.
Starting tomorrow, we don't have to wear masks
anymore. Kids are jumping up and down. Some are pulling their mask off their face as they're doing that, throwing their arms up in the air.
Is anybody excited?
And the jubilation continues in the classroom. By the way, LifeNews.com reporting that legislators in South Dakota, Republican legislators in South Dakota, have refused to consider a bill proposed by Governor Noem that would have banned almost all abortions if a fetal heartbeat could be detected. A move the governor called unprecedented in the very worst way. And here in Dr. Anthony Fauci, a story from LifeNews.com as well, when it comes to the grisly use of aborted baby body parts for dubious scientific research in America, a new report shows embattled NIH Director Anthony Fauci is behind most of the funding. National Institutes of Health that he directs is behind $27 million in taxpayer funding for research involving tissue or body parts from babies killed in abortions, or approximately 80% of the funding for all such research in the United States. Let's go to Jim in Wisconsin. Jim, you're on the air.
Yes, I want to speak about this reporter that was interviewing Jen Psaki, or was asking Jen Psaki a question about when does a president believe life begins. Mm-hmm. And one of her statements was, believes in the right to choose. And I would say that reporter should have had a follow-up statement immediately and said, then Mr. Biden needs to end these COVID shot mandates immediately, because people should have a right to choose what they do with their own bodies, correct?
Yeah, that's the same standard, Jim. You hit it hit the nail on the head. Thank you. Sue in Racine, Wisconsin, you're on the air.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call. I am a registered nurse, 40-plus years in intensive care only. Two comments. Number one, the government wants us to have the women to have the right to choose for an abortion, which I disagree with, obviously. But we don't have the right to disapprove of putting an experimental vaccine in our bodies.
Yeah.
And number two, I don't know if anyone's ever thought that if you have to take a blood transfusion, is this Omicron vaccine in the blood that you are receiving?
It's a good question, Sue. Don't have an answer to it.
And I haven't been able to ask anybody that, but I'd love to know, because those of us that have stood against this, I'd be very leery on taking a blood transfusion from just anyone right now.
Thank you, Sue.
If I had to. So 2 questions, that's it.
Very good. And, truthforhealth.org may be a good site to get that information. Let's see, we had Dr. Elizabeth Lee Valite with us, and perhaps we can get her back for a broadcast here as well. Let's go to Carol, our next caller. Hi, Carol, you're on the air.
Yes, thank you for taking my phone call. And the comment I have for many times here is, how in the world can anybody Mr. Biden or whoever they are on his board, how can they justify an abortion, that a woman has the right to do that, when we, as Christians, don't have the right to refuse that crazy vaccine?
Mm-hmm.
I certainly wish that someone could explain that to them.
Yeah.
It's so not right.
Thank you for your comments. I mean, folks, we just heard 3 callers in a row, basically, with much that same matter there. 800-733-9829. More Minnesota. Rex, you're on the air.
Hi, Jim. I'm glad you're feeling well.
Thank you.
All this COVID vaccine, I don't think has any. The vaccines, I don't think has anything to do with COVID at all. It's all about depopulation, and that goes back to climate change and global warming and all of this. There's too many people on the planet, liberals believe, and I think that's what all of this is about. COVID-19, vaccines, it's all about depopulation.
Well, better be careful with those comments, because it looks like being targeted from that National Terrorism Advisory Bulletin about being a threat to our U.S. homeland with those views.
That's right. I'm a domestic terrorist for saying that. So
it's amazing. Yeah, thank you, Rex.
Yep.
We're going to Will in Burlington. You're on the air.
Hey, how's it going, sir? Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the abortion issue.
Yeah.
And just wanted to say, where's the church in this time? Standing at the mills where the innocent lives are being led to the slaughter. It upsets me that there's only 7 to 10 believers out there while there's more death courts. So this is just my petition to the church to go, share the gospel, the good news to not only the mothers, the death courts, but also to take a stand against it literally and not just be about it.
Great. Thank you for the comment here, Will. Yeah, certainly a challenge to the church. Sadly, we're so busy in entertainment today, aren't we? We got to entertain those who want to come through our doors here today. And it is time for the church to rise up. We are called to be light. We are called to be salt. Shani is calling from Shani from Peoria, Arizona. You're on the air.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to make you aware, because I didn't hear it in the news roundup, that the Satanic Tabernacle is actually coming this weekend. They started today at a convention to take over, quote-unquote, take over Scottsdale with a conference. They're trying to raise awareness because they were not allowed to give an invocation at the Scottsdale City Council. And there's just been a huge merge to pray against that.
Thank you, Shani. We covered it several weeks ago on a news roundup, but lost track of the date, so thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Mm-hmm, thank you.
And our final call from Tennessee. Melanie, you're on the air.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to chime in on the abortion issue. I think it all boils down to whether personhood or property. That's the question. Is it a piece of property? Well, you can do with your property whatever you wish, but if it's a unique person, you got to kind of figure out biology 101 here.
Indeed. Thank you for your call here, Melanie, as we close off the program today. Thank you for joining us on our news roundup here on Crosstalk. Troubling times in which we live. Troubling times. But as stated just moments ago, let's be the church. Let's be the light God has called us to share the gospel, the good news to a world that is so in need of a Savior. Let's also be salt. That is to have that impact, preservative even upon our families and the society here today. But sometimes salt gets in the wound and it irritates, doesn't it? But that's part of the job of which it is. Well, it's Friday afternoon. The Lord's Day is coming. I trust you'll be in a Bible-believing, Bible-teaching church this Lord's Day. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.